Thank you for coming to our first brown bag. We're hoping to have more of these as the year progresses. Our very first one, to coincide with our new OWEB campaign, the Together We Do Good Things, is with OWEB Director Meta Loftsgaarden. And she's going to go through some of the work that OWEB has done and how that ties with what we do here every day at the lottery. So,
all right. Thanks, Thais.
Oh, yes, and Courtney Schaff, who helped us put a lot of these videos that you're going to see put together. So.
All right, thanks, Thais. So I'm really excited to be here and be part of this first Brown Bag Lunch and Learn. Courtney and I were just talking ahead of time that we do brown bags. They don't typically have microphones and video cameras. So it's great to come to an organization that knows what they're doing in this world. And I want to start first by thanking all of you. As Thais said, we just kicked off the campaign around the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board and the work that we do with local partners on the ground. And I'm going to highlight some of that today. I would encourage you, if you haven't been out to your website, to take a look at the videos. The videos are amazing. And what's really neat for us, the work that we do is out on the ground. It's out in the field, planting trees and removing dams and other things that I'm going to highlight for you today. But the folks who work out there don't often get the quality and the level of service that you all provided to them in this campaign. And they are so incredibly excited. So I wanted to extend my thanks on their behalf to you all. It's very different for us in the type of world that we're in. That we just, it's very rural, it's very out in the field, and it's very hard to get video crews and other folks out there. So we're really excited. I encourage you to go out and take a look at the videos that are out there when you have a chance. It tells a lot about the stories that are there. And what I'm going to talk to you about today as one of your beneficiaries is a little bit about the work that we do and why we do it and why it matters. And we've been around for 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary starting this fall. And that 20th anniversary is the 20th anniversary of lottery investment in watershed work across the state. So we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, but it's our 20th anniversary with you. And so the projects and the programs that I'm going to highlight today are just to give you a bit more of a taste and a flavor of the work that you do and how that connects up with the work that we're doing on the ground. So I want to start a little bit with just a little bit of background. What the heck is an OWEB and what does it do? So we are a state agency. We're a very small state agency. There are a set of natural resource agencies, probably I think about 16 or 18 of us. We make up, with your lottery investments and federal dollars, about 16% of the budget of the natural resource agencies, but about 2% of the staff. And that's because what we are is largely a grant-making agency. Our job is to take those lottery dollars and turn around and invest them in the projects that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. But we do that through these amazing local organizations. And you all got a chance to go out and meet some of them and work with them. I'm going to highlight a few of them today. But our focus is really helping to protect and restore healthy watersheds and natural habitats that support thriving communities and strong economies. I'm going to have Courtney hand out just a little piece of background about us. I'm not going to go through it today, but one of the questions that we always get asked is, all right, so you work in watersheds, so you do water work, right? This is what you do. We work in streams, we work in rivers, and yes, we do, and I'm going to highlight some of that. But a watershed is everywhere that any of us lives. If you live at the top of Mount Hood or the top of Mount Jefferson, or the Steens Mountains in eastern Oregon, if you live down in Newport or Tillamook, or if you live here in Salem, every spot that we live and work and play is part of a watershed. And so on the first page of this document, we actually just talked a little bit about what is a watershed and why does it matter to Oregonians. And it matters because those watersheds help us clean the water that we drink, but they also provide the places that we live and the places that we recreate. They provide habitat for sage grouse in eastern Oregon, which is a big issue for landowners on the east side of the state. At the same time, they're providing habitat for Chinook salmon over on the west side of the state. We have amazing, if you drive up and down the valley, especially as you go down towards Roseburg, you see these phenomenal oak trees that turn beautiful colors in the fall. That's part of the native habitat that we all are working together to protect in this state. There is a large focus on water, but that focus is because that land that the water runs across is helping to clean the water. It's helping to keep it cool. We live in an amazing place in Oregon. You go to other countries in the world and yet you have to worry about where your water comes from. In Oregon, we don't. And it's in large part because of the kind of work that we do. So that's our focus. Again, most of our money comes from lottery. So about 65 to 70% over the years of our funding has come through lottery investments. It's a permanent investment, which makes us able to do a lot of things that other funders aren't able to do because they depend on annual or biennial budgets. So the next question I get asked is, why do we do it? Or you look around at Oregon's environment and it is gorgeous. There's a reason we all pick to live here. It's a beautiful place to live. But there are a lot of things that have happened over the last 100, 200 years that have shifted what our environment looks and feels like. So I just popped up a couple pictures here. On the left is a town in Idaho, a town called Wallowa, Idaho. If you've ever driven across to Montana, you've seen it. Little tiny town, I-90 runs right through the middle of it. In 1910, that town burned to the ground in one of the largest forest fires in U.S. history, and it shifted how we paid attention to fire, which meant we stopped it, right? We want every fire out as quickly as it can go out. What you'll find, and I'll show a few pictures of it later, is that means that our forests got really dense and really thick, and when we have fire now, how many days did we have this year in Salem and Portland of smoke? Those fires are burning hotter, they're burning bigger, they're burning larger acres because we haven't let small fires across the landscape for the last 100+ years. So that fire changed how we treat forests in Oregon, and one of the things we're working to is to change that system back. On the top right, that's the bridge across the John Day River. 1964, there were huge floods in Oregon, blew out a lot of our systems, blew out bridges, took out houses, really wreaked havoc across the state. And what we did as a result is said, we got to get the water out of the system as quickly as we can because it's scary. Big water is scary. Well, what we lost in that is actually if you let water spread across a floodplain, it slows down. And it provides places for fish to hang out. So I'm randomly, because I saw a really nice motorcycle outside, I ride a motorcycle. And when we go on long trips, about every 100, 150 miles, I need a place to stop. I need to get food, I need to use a restroom, I need to sleep for the night. And those places exist right along the interstate system. Well, what we did to fish in Oregon is we sent all that water shooting right out of our system, and there was no place for the fish to stop. The little guys get shoved out because the water's moving so fast, and the big guys who are trying to come back don't have a place to sleep. They don't have a place to eat. They don't have a place to just rest for a while. And we did that because of those floods. So that's another thing we're trying to fix. This one always amazes me. That's the Willamette River that's being protected with a whole bunch of cars that were thrown into the Willamette River because we were trying, again, to control out water. So these are the set of things that have happened over the last 100 years that with your help and our lottery dollars, we're working to address. We actually started our movement back in the 80s. There was a lot of push on the environmental side around lawsuits to try and fix environmental issues. So even if you're not involved in natural resources, you've probably heard about the spotted owl or other big challenges between forestry and environmental groups or agriculture and environmental groups. Well, in Oregon, we like to do things different. The Oregon way is a lot more collaborative. And so a group of ranchers and environmentalists got together and said, can we find a different way? Can we find a way that we can voluntarily help landowners do what they need to do that costs a lot of money and meet those environmental goals while keeping those farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners right on the land where they live? So they got together. They camped out at ranches across the state and really found ways that they could work together. What they found is to do what we want to do in Oregon, there needed to be funding. And that's where this model came in that we're investing in now. So this movement is about Oregonians. We are a tiny, tiny agency, but we grant to over 200 different local organizations. We've had 7,000 grants, over 7,000 grants since our organization was created back in the late 90s. We have invested, I'll talk about it a bit more later, over $500 million. But we don't do it ourselves. We do it through local watershed councils and soil and water conservation districts, local land trusts, even groups like Solve, who you've worked with before. Over 200 groups across the state that are out there every day doing this work on the ground. And it ties right into Oregonians' passion for place. I live on the Clackamas River up outside of Oregon City. I drive up and down the Willamette, and this is what we see all summer long, right? People want to be in nature in Oregon. You live here for a reason. So the great thing is we started with this grassroots movement, and 3/4 of Oregonians in the state voted to fund parks and natural resources when that ballot initiative came across. 3/4. It passed in every county in the state, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise. This has been a movement that has really become a full Oregon movement and continues to be strongly supported. So our job is to insert money, and it's really fun. I say consistently, Courtney and I have the best job in state government. I want to thank you all for that because you all make it possible. Again, about $600 million that with your help we've invested over the last 20 years. And out of that comes work across the state. So the state, as I talked about, everybody lives in a watershed, which means we can actually break up the state just like you break it up by county. You can actually draw watershed boundaries and show the watersheds in the state. We have investments just in the last 2 years in 93% of the watersheds in the state. So we spread our investments out far and wide. We've worked in the Malheur around the wildlife refuge. The partners that we work with there are part of the reason that that community has stayed strong through a lot of adversity. They have bonded around the environment, around education and other work in that community, and they've created a strong community that is doing work like you see here with the sagebrush, that lower left-hand picture. We're cutting juniper trees. I started to wonder when I came here why that mattered. Juniper sucks up a lot of water, and all of the surrounding plants can't get enough. So we're out there making sure that we're taking juniper out so that it can look pretty in the landscape and so that animals like sage grouse can have a place to hide, survive, and thrive. So I want to talk about a couple of specific projects, and some of these are highlighted in the videos that are out on the website, and then a few others that are just my personal favorites. One is the Willamette Confluence, which is just right upriver around Eugene. Oregon has a lot of gravel mining extraction in the state, and that tends to happen. The best place to find gravel bars, river systems. And so what they'll do is they'll go in and dig out that gravel. They can get a permit to mine that. And then when they're done, there is mitigation that's required, but it's really hard to get that back to a place where those fish can have a little place to hang out, a place to eat, a place to sleep as they're going up the river. And the Willamette system is really important. It's one of the largest tributaries to the Columbia, and the Columbia is one of the largest rivers in the world. So working with a set of partners in the Willamette, we did a restoration project that brought that system back for fish and wildlife. It's hundreds of acres. It has millions of dollars that were invested, including lottery funds, and it took years to put together. And they are out there with big equipment doing some really cool stuff. So it's not just planting trees alongside of the river. We are doing really big investments across the state. On the right-hand side, you see a map that goes from Eugene up to Portland. This is just one dot right down at the bottom at Eugene. We and the investments from lottery are working all the way up that system and have identified priorities. Again, how do we find those spaces where fish can sit and hang out for a while that's cool, that's clean, that supports other wildlife habitat as well? And this is just one of the projects that's taking place there. We are doing community conservation in a really, really big way in Oregon. You see a lot as we travel through the state of things like big highway interchanges. That's a lot of money that goes into one place, but it's spent in a really short period of time. It's often out-of-state contractors who are doing the work. These are projects that are ongoing and they're local. So for every $1 million of lottery funds that come into a community, 15 to 24 local jobs are created. Maybe permanent, maybe not, but they're created in those local communities. 90 cents of every dollar stays here in Oregon. So that means that money is turning around. It's being used to buy food. It's being used for hotels. It's being used for equipment. And the equipment is really big. I'm a little jealous that I don't work in the field because there's some great big equipment that we're working with. So this first gentleman, his name is Fred Messerly. He was a county commissioner down in the Coquille area. He's a rancher. He and a set of other ranchers have 1,700 acres, which is a lot, down in the Coquille Valley in a place that's called Winter Lake. The reason it's called Winter Lake is in the summer they grow cows, in the winter it is a lake. It is 1,700 acres. You drive by it, all you see is a lake. What happens in that system, so they're a ways up the Coquille, and I come not from Oregon, so I don't know a lot about tides. I come from Montana. But tides that come in that we see on the beach, right, in Cannon Beach or Newport or anywhere else, actually push water up those river systems, 30, sometimes 40 or more miles. The Columbia is tidally influenced still at Portland until it hits the dam. So what happens for these guys is they've got water going out through creeks, and they've got water coming up with the tide. And they have to find a way to protect their agriculture land from that. So they've built levees. We have levees around the Portland airport. There are a lot of places we have levees. But you got to let water out, too. So they have a thing called a tide gate that lets the stream water out, but then stops and doesn't let the tide water in. Those things fail. And if it fails on his property, they lose 1,700 acres of ranch land. They can't raise cows anymore, and a vital local community interest is lost. But we also wanted to make sure we had habitat for fish at the same time. So we invested, Fred got to drive a really big piece of equipment. And at the end of the day, we have this brand new tide gate that lets water hang out and not go too fast, because if water rushes out of that system, again, the fish get pushed out right with it. So this actually mediates that tide and lets water flow in and out in a way that doesn't flood their farmland, but lets the fish come in and out. And it doesn't look that big until you see the people who are standing up there above it in the corner. These things are huge, $10 million investment to help those farms continue and to grow 250,000 baby fish a year in that 1,700 acres. My other favorite people, this is Haley Construction. They are a third-generation family. The grandfather was doing logging operations. He was cutting trees in the forests, which we still do and is highly supported in Oregon. He was building logging roads. His son on the left there went into that same business, and they started doing some highway work as well. And then they got passionate about conservation. Those three women on the right-hand side are in their 30s. They are now running the big, heavy equipment. They are doing projects that support fish and wildlife habitat, and what they say is, we do our highway construction projects the rest of the year so that we can spend our time in the summers working on fish and helping to save fish habitat. Those three women are running equipment as big or bigger than what you saw before, and they are moving logs. This looks like a landslide, right? They're moving logs into the system. This used to have, just like I talked about, one big channel that shoved water out of the system as quickly as possible. Now you walk in here and you see fish all over the place. They've got a chance to stop. They've got a cool place to hang out. There's insects there for them. And they took big equipment out and hauled all those trees out onto that property. That's the 15 to 24 local jobs in that community. That's a construction company that we are keeping in business through our lottery investments. Another down in Ashland. So I'm sure you guys saw on TV or heard in the news this year that Ashland lost millions of dollars this year because of the smoke, and they couldn't have outside plays. I think there were 28 different performances that were canceled. This community, which is a very strong environmental community, had a long opposition to logging. We've talked to some loggers in the area who said that folks in the community used to wave at them when they went by, but it was with one finger. Now, through the work that we're doing with lottery dollars and federal dollars and others, they're going into those systems, leaving the big trees, leaving the diversity, but taking out a lot of that messy stuff that hasn't burned for hundreds of years. And if you just think about at home, you know, if you've got a fire pit in your backyard and you throw a bunch of little twigs into that, it burns hot and it burns fast. So what we're trying to do is get all those little twigs out of the system and clean it out, but leave the big trees that spotted owls and marbled murrelet and other species care about, and reduce the fire danger for that community. So they are working to protect their source water. Ashland's source water is up in the hills there, but they're also working to make sure that they can reduce the number of days that they're hit by that level of smoke. So to do that, they're actually letting fire on the landscape on the off season so that we can do some burns, and they're loving the log trucks that come through and are hauling logs out of that system. Again, local jobs supported in local communities. Another one, the Wallowa River 6 Ranch. This is another that is a video out there for you all to look at. How many, have you been to Enterprise? Anybody? Okay, so as you're driving into Enterprise, it kind of necks in. There's a river and the train tracks that are running along the right side, and then the road, and it just necks in right before you get into town. The 6 Ranch is that ranch, when everything's tightened up in there. And they had an amazing property. The woman, Liza Jane McAllister, who runs the ranch, has a strong passion for conservation. She has an even stronger passion because her son is a fishing guide. So she wants to make sure that that system is good so her son can be bringing folks out to fish on that river. So if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see a little tiny stream channel. That used to be the main river, and it, again, shot right through that system. There wasn't a chance for fish to hang out, and as a result, there weren't that many fish in the system. They recreated this nice bends in the river. This was right after construction was done, so that's now all filled in with willows and other grass and shrub species. The collaboration time was 20 years for this project. It was 6 partners. The fish hadn't been there for 30 years. It took them 2 weeks to find their way back after that system got fixed. 2 weeks to find out that there was a happy home for them to be in. And we're supporting a family fishing guide service and brand marketing for their company. She raises, I always say coriander, and that's not right, Corriente beef, which are it's a fairly small cow. They sell them into the market. Terminator has a beef product that they sell. They sell it here in the Portland area. So she has a specialty branded beef, and she highlights the work that she's doing around conservation to market her product. And now we've got these great little cows that are wandering around in that system that have better grass, not right now, that's winter, but better grass to graze in the summer as well. So with that, thank you. Because the work that you do to promote the lottery program, to get more people to participate, to help make it a successful program, to help make it the pride of Oregon, is helping us really to grow local economies, thriving communities, while we're supporting a strong environment. So I want to stop there, see if you all have any questions for us, anything that you want to know about our programs, how you can come out and volunteer on some of our projects, or any other questions that you all might have.
Where does the rest of your funding come from? We're 65%. Where's the other?
We have a mix of funding. So a large part of our funding comes from what's called the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund. Those are federal dollars that are appropriated every year. The advantage of those dollars is they bring extra money in specifically around salmon and other fish species that travel to the ocean and back. The downside and the challenge is that's an every year grant. So we have to apply for that funding every year. And the reason that we have been so incredibly successful with the program is because we have the lottery dollars. So Oregon returns in some cases 80% of the outputs of that program nationally. Because we can match that up with lottery dollars. So we get money from other places, but we get it because of the lottery fund. We also receive money from other federal agencies. We're a really efficient grant maker, and so we can bring in money from other agencies and distribute it out. And then we receive half of the salmon license plate dollars as well. So put a salmon on your plate, and that's the other piece of funding that we receive. Yes?
Are you able to give grants to most of the people that you deem worthy?
Oh, that's a great question. No. So the question, in case I think you guys all heard, is, are we able to give grants to folks, everybody who comes in? So we have at any given time about 1,100 active grants. We fund over half of the projects that come in, and about 70 to 80% of the ones that are deemed worthy. However, what I've seen over time, and this is just watching as a funder, I think that's largely in part of a market, right? So our grantees know how much funding we have. One, they're putting in projects that they know are the types of projects that we'll fund. And two, they'll tend to say, I'm only going to put in one project this time because I know that in this region, OWEB has about $1 million in this cycle. So we've been thinking about a number of things from that perspective. One is we partner with folks like Meyer Memorial Trust, Bonneville Power Administration, and others so that we can do some joint grant programs, so we can bring in new dollars from foundations and other folks. And again, as a funder, we can have a really different conversation about funding than a grantee who's coming and knocking on Meyer Memorial Trust or somebody else's door. So we can talk as funders, how are we more strategic. The other thing is that the governor's office, along with a number of agencies, are working on a vision for how we invest in water infrastructure over the long term and start treating it like we treat transportation. So as an example, we work with irrigation districts and we help them put more water in the stream for fish. At the same time, they're saving water for their properties, and they're putting pipe instead of canal for their irrigation districts. One irrigation district needs $72 million of improvements. There are 100 plus irrigation districts in the state, and that's just irrigation districts. The Tidegate project I showed you, the big one with the really big equipment, $10 million for one project. So what we're finding is, because Oregon has been so progressive in this work, we now have a complexity of projects that you're not seeing in other states, and I think we're going to have to think about different funding systems. The great thing is that lottery has provided the base for us to learn how to invest, learn what we should be investing in. But so far, we are not able to fully fund what comes in the door. Yeah.
Can you tell us how we can get involved in volunteers?
Yes, we were just talking about that right before this session. So there's a mix of things with our projects. There are some projects, if you think about the Tidegate project or hauling huge logs around a system, that probably we're not going to send you guys out. They won't let me go out to do it. But there are other cases where, in particular, they're doing tree planting projects or monitoring, where we're going out and actually seeing, okay, what is going on with the water? We have cases where when we're doing a big project, they'll need folks to come out and actually catch fish and get them out of a system. So if we're going to take a dam out, we want to make sure that we're not killing any fish in the process. So we take them out and move them. I think we have a little bit of video footage of that. So those are times when we can find out on your behalf if we know you guys are interested some places. But in addition, there's a group called the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. There are 19 land trusts across the state of Oregon. They are starting what's called a 1 million person campaign, getting 1 million people to donate, give of their time, or get out on the land. And so they actually will be looking actively for people across the state to come out and volunteer on their properties. That might be trail cleaning, it might be planting trees. There's a big range of stuff, and those properties are everywhere across Oregon. So if you all are interested, we'd be glad to work with you and get that connection made. And they would be so excited because one of the things that's really cool about the lottery investment in our programs is people love it. They are so excited that the lottery dollars are coming, that they're able to use them, and if they have a chance to build a relationship with you guys as employees, they would love that opportunity. So.
That's slightly off question as well.
Yeah.
So I know you guys primarily deal with watersheds, but I've always wondered why there's not more natural crossings for animals in Oregon. I know it's a big thing in Europe.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard of them here.
There are a couple. So Department of Fish and Wildlife and ODOT have started just a couple of the wildlife. So by way of explanation, this would be, and they have them up in Canada too, if you ever go up to Banff National Park or Jasper. So you've got a road going along and you've got an overpass or an underpass that is allowing wildlife to cross so that you can reduce deaths of wildlife, you can reduce car accidents, and you can create a corridor, because you will actually see species, especially on major interstates, that are not interbreeding because they're not going across those systems, or if they're going across, they're not living through it. So there are starting to be some in Oregon, and Department of Transportation, Fish and Wildlife are working on that. We've had a couple proposals that come in, and what we do, we've got a pretty high bar for being able to describe how this is benefiting specifically native fish and wildlife habitat. In some places, it's more about reducing traffic interactions, but in other places there really is a problem with a species that it is not able to thrive the way that it should. And in those places we would be investing as well. What I can't speak to is why they haven't always been here. I came from Montana, and what we had in Montana were a lot of undercrossings, and they were super easy to do. So I don't know why it's a new thing in Oregon. Yeah. Yes?
How do you guys know what to do? Because I know you guys are bringing in plants and to restore, but how do you guys learn what you need to do to restore an area?
So we're lucky in Oregon. There's a couple of things that play into that. On the wildlife and fish habitat side, we work with like the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and their federal counterparts, and they've developed what they call recovery plans. So they will tell you in a watershed, for example, these fish can't get there just because there are a bunch of little tiny road culverts, and the road culverts are up this high from the ground, and the fish just can't jump there. So if you guys could just get in there and change those culverts and make them able for fish to get through, they'll be fine. Whereas in another area, they've done the analysis and they'll say the temperature's just too warm. Fish need 70 degrees or lower. And so we get through areas, Portland is an example. It's tough to keep the Willamette cool when you're going through Portland. So we've got great science expertise that tells us. And then we also have our local community folks. So what we say is we ground our projects both in the best science that's available, but also in local knowledge. So we have a lot of ranchers who will say, 50 years ago, this stream ran all year round. Something's going on here. And that's where we find out that juniper sucks a lot of water out of the system. If we pull juniper out, we can get more water in. So it's that mix of really good science and then local knowledge and history of an area. I am a generalist, so I'm lucky that I don't have to figure that out, but I am continually amazed at our local grantees and how pretty spot on they are in the kinds of projects they're proposing.
We were down at 5 Mile Bell Creek filming. They are very specific on the plants that they're putting in for native species and taking out everything that was the nursery seed that they are growing native species there to replant out along. So they had it pretty dialed in. They knew what they're doing.
Yeah, and to the point where they'll say, at 1 foot above the creek level, it's these kind of plants, and at 3 feet above the creek level, it's a whole different kind of plant. And they'll set up the system so that some plants that they want to die, for example, when you really narrow up a stream and just shoot it out of the system, you actually get a lot of big trees like ponderosa pine or Doug fir or other things that come in. We actually want those to die when we expand the system back out because we want willows and we want red osier dogwood and other things to grow in. And so what you'll see after you do one of these plantings is a lot of the big trees actually die and then fall into the stream, which creates places for fish to hide. So they're doing a mix both of what they put in and what they want to take out too. Yeah. Yeah.
I love to kind of I just wonder sometimes about the water quality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that your team focuses on.
Yes. So our priorities, native fish and wildlife habitat and water quality, co-equal. And we have a lot of different issues in Oregon. Actually in Oregon, not in Oregon, but one of the challenges in Oregon is temperature is actually a water quality issue. Because when temperature goes up too high, that's when you get some things like the blue-green algae and other things. But we have temperature, we have sediment. So if you look in areas, you'll see it every once in a while in the winter if you're driving down the Columbia. You'll see a river system and it's got this kind of big plume of dirt that you can see out in the Willamette or in the Columbia River system. That's because there's a lot of dirt that's coming from those upland areas. And one of the things that we do, for example, in Wasco County, 93% of their farmers in that county have planted their land to what we call cover crops and what we call conservation cover, which means the ground is never bare. So they're seeding their wheat right into last year's wheat so that they can keep that soil. So that's another piece of water quality that we work on. Nutrients, bacteria, pesticides, all of those areas we work with farmers and ranchers to reduce their use of those. It's always amazing to me because I'm the same way. I'm in the Clackamas and in the Willamette, and I love those systems. There were times back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that fish were dying belly up in those river systems. And because of the cleanup that's been done over many years, we can kayak in it and swim in it. And we get notices from time to time, but generally, we're in a very different system than we were 50 years ago. And again, a lot of that's due to the work that you all are doing and other folks as well. Other questions? So again, I want to thank you guys because we do get to do amazing work as a beneficiary of yours, and I'm excited to come and talk to you about it. I would love for you to come out and see it. If you guys ever want to do a tour, we can get you out there. If you want to volunteer, we can get you connected up. And a huge thanks to the team that went out and did the videos, because from our end, it's a really underslung area, and the fact that we now have some amazingly high quality video and ads and other things that we can continue to share this story, we're pretty excited about that. So thank you.